How's it going, guys? It's Eclipse here and welcome to some of the most overpowered and game-changing tanks World of Tanks have ever introduced into World of Tanks console, and hopefully it'll be an interesting one for you guys to either work your way towards some of these vehicles if you can, or just to know about them so when you see them in the game you're wary of what they can do. So to start off with, let's get right into it, and of course we'll be looking at one of the kind of starting to create overpowered tanks in World of Tanks, and that was the Machine. Now this is a console exclusive vehicle because of course making it one of the most overpowered vehicles ever introduced into World of Tanks was one of World of Tanks console's first exclusive vehicles, and that is the Machine. And although many people think that this tank is actually not as good as it actually is under the right kind of player's hands, this thing is really dirty and can be one of the most annoying tanks to come up against. Because why is that? Well, it gets all different aspects as with the mercenary vehicles, where essentially Wargaming take multiple bits of the vehicles and place them all into one vehicle. So what we have here is a hybrid. It is a chieftain turret because, you know, why not have a super good turret, then shafted on to a AMX-50B hull, and then it has a Skoda or TVP gun, which is the auto-loading main armament that is very powerful. And what does that result in? Well, it results in a tank that not only has a little bit of armor, but it also has a ridiculous total alpha damage of being able to deal 13 or 1280 damage, I believe, in one clip, because it has 4 shell autoloader, has 320 damage per shell, and yeah, I mean this thing is just unbelievably good when it can unload all of its shells. And because it is a TVP, and not just any TVP gun but the unnerfed version of the TVP, so that it has a 1.5 second intraclip reload, 0.35 accuracy, and is very fast, because of course being on a 50B hull it's able to do 67 kilometers an hour. And that means that not only are you going to be able to get into position early on to get that 1280 damage off really quickly, you're also able to then leave a flank. You're able to mobilize yourself around the battlefield, which is different from what you might be seeing with some of the other vehicles in the game, and what makes this vehicle slightly different from some of the other autoloaders. I mean, a 57 heavy, although having slightly more alpha damage in a singular clip, it does not have the ability to move around. It probably has worse armor than this tank, and of course this is a very mobile tank. And why does this tank break the game, or at least be very overpowered? Well, of course, when you combine mobility, alpha, turret armor, and a decent amount of gun depression, 10 degrees, you can essentially get on a ridgeline, and this tank becomes very powerful, as well as being able to, you know, churn out a ton of damage. And it turns out so much damage consistently, and of course at least it is free for everyone to pick up. You just have to spend your life on the game to be able to complete the contract, because it is a mercenary contract. It's available right now on World of Tanks to pick up, and yeah, you've got to be very aware of this vehicle. There are a few kind of downsides to this tank in that you can be penned quite easily if people know the weak points, which is essentially that even if this tank is looking at you basically from any level of this kind of side profile, if it has its hull turned even slightly, you can pen the inner drive wheel, which is essentially right next to the front track. So you can see that there is a slight chunk of green that you can see on the side armor which can be penned, and it gets penned every single time. So this is a key thing that you can do to both track the machine to stop it moving and be able to pen it, but remember it's going to be able to hit you 4 times for 320 alpha each time, and it will fully unload in 4.5 seconds. So yeah, I mean, it's It's not very nice, and unless you're in another autoloader, you're probably not going to outtrade this thing, and then by the time that you reload, it may have already repaired its tracks and left in the time that you have a chance to maybe hit it twice, or maybe even if you get lucky and hit it 3 times, you still probably haven't done the same amount of damage as this thing has done to you, and yeah, it can always come back after a small amount of time to clip you out again, considering that the damage per minute isn't actually awful. It has 2,300 and reloads in a total of 28.5 seconds, which comes down to about 24 seconds when you are using all of the equipment on this vehicle. Yeah, I mean, this tank is just horrible, and one that experienced players will absolutely dominate games in, and yeah, not particularly the funnest tank in the game, but remember, you can always pick it up and try it out yourself. Yeah, I know people find this tank to be rubbish, but that's probably because they're YOLOing in it off way too much. And yeah, I mean, if you YOLO in any tank, you're not going to do that well. And of course, it has a slightly higher skill cap than most tanks because it is an autoloader and does rely upon you knowing good positions to go to and making sure that you do relocate to be best suited to unload that clip when you are ready. So yeah, very, very good tank. But if we're starting off with a really, really good tank, I guess we can move over to another game changer, and that is the M47 Iron Arnie, because of course we get a tier 10 version of the tier 8 premium on World of Tanks PC, because yeah, I mean, I'm sure that putting it up 2 tiers and then making everything better about the tank would be, yeah, completely balanced. I mean, this tank has 390 alpha. It's not an autoloader, but it has armor that is super, super annoying. I mean, this tank has very, very good spaced armor. You can see the little turquoise plates that go all around this vehicle are spaced armor. So not only do you have to go through that, but then you have to go through the armor behind it. And when it has decent, okay armor behind it, yeah, it's basically unpennable in the turret unless you hit the cupola on the top of the tank, or you hit the gun mantlet, well, underneath the gun mantlet where you can pen as well. Or alternatively, if you can somehow manage to squeeze a shell underneath into the lower plate on the left and right hand side, you'll see there's like a V shape, and essentially you can pen in there. But of course, it's going to be able to hit you quite reliably, and when it's on the move, side scraping and doing all kinds of wiggles, it can be hard to reliably hit that, and it isn't the biggest of targets to be able to hit that lower plate. I mean the actual lower plate, not the tank, because the tank is actually very large. But it is also whacking you for 390 alpha, and how much damage per minute does this medium/heavy hybrid have? Well, it has 3,155 base damage per minute, which is, yeah, I mean, not particularly the nicest tank to come up against. And it also gets good view range because combining armor, speed, mobility, the ability to deal 390 in a really quick fashion, and yeah, having good view range makes this tank definitely balanced. So yeah, I mean, this was another feature that World of Tanks brought in, of course, for the Arnold Schwarzenegger promotion that they did at Christmas. And yeah, this thing is just not very well balanced, and yeah, console went above and beyond the tier 8 premium that PC have. So yeah, it's just another one. So hopefully you guys understand that this tank is not particularly very balanced, but you know, we've detailed where you can actually pen it, and hopefully it won't be too much of a trouble. And of course, as soon as it starts to side scrape like the machine, you can pen it through the track at the front on the side and be able to bypass those plates. So essentially you want to be trying to get slightly to the side of it and then penning through those tracks, and you'll be able to easily deal with this tank. But for the most players in the game, that is not the easiest of challenges. And so this is a very kind of balanced tank against some of the newer players in the game, or players that don't necessarily research into the tanks in the game. So hopefully you guys will know about it, and yeah, maybe how to take it out, even if it is very, very good. And then boy oh boy, a surprise to see the Su-152 Turan featured in this video. Yes, the Cold War vehicle that was brought into the Cold War game mode, which is a separate exclusive mode on console that features tanks created after World War II, and then they featured this tank in World War II mode and didn't really change it a whole lot. And so what does this tank have? Well, for the keen-eyed of you, you've seen it's already got 950 damage in one shell. So it's essentially got nearly a Jaegeru gun on the Turan, and you might be thinking, well, it's got to have some negatives or at least some benefits if it does have this high alpha damage, and you'd be expecting it to have a long reload, which, I mean, it does have a fairly long reload, but 15 seconds to be able to do 950 damage isn't actually very long at all, and it has 3,700 damage per minute. As you can see, it's set up here. We do have advanced loader and ventilation, so it's boosted up a little bit, and of course you do have some bonuses to the view range because we've got advanced optics on the vehicle too. But we don't have a commander in it, so let's jump a commander in here just so that we can see the full scale extent of what this tank is like when you fully equip it. And here we go, 510 meters view range, 296 still concealment, so it's very kind of stealthy for the most part compared to some of the other tank destroyers in the game. It's quite low profile compared to something like a Jaegeru, so gets that advantage. And I mean, I guess it doesn't really have that much armor, so you can't really bounce off of this tank unless you get quite unlucky and manage to hit it at a disgusting angle. So you can pen this thing with HE if you do have that loaded in your vehicles. So it is a nice one to hit. But remember, it's going to be slapping you for that 950, and you might be thinking, well, at least it's going to have bad accuracy. There's no way that they can give it 63 kilometers an hour top speed, good vision, good still concealment, and a decent amount of alpha, really good penetration, and then give it a decent amount of accuracy. Well, you'd be wrong. It has 0.29 accuracy when fully upgraded, which means that not only does it have disgusting damage per minute, 4,361, a 13-second reload, 0.29 accuracy, 63 kilometers an hour top speed. Yeah, I mean, it's got basically everything you want in a tank destroyer, and when you look at something like a Jaegeru, for most skilled players in the game, there is no reason why you would play a Jaegeru over this tank, because of course it has a turret as well, so it's not even like there's many bonuses to the Jaegeru. I guess the only bonus is that you can't be penned with HE in the Jaegeru, but you'll still be penned by pretty much everyone, since the armor in that vehicle is not particularly great. But the Su-152 Turan is just the pinnacle of a broken tank destroyer, and it is at tier 10, so yeah, I mean, I absolutely despise this thing, and it is just a severely overpowered vehicle that is just super annoying to come up against. I mean, even the worst players in the game are still going to be able to hit you for 950, even if they're aiming at some of the worst places to possibly aim at your vehicle. 303 standard pen is more than enough to go through the majority of any medium tank in the game, plus majority of heavy tanks, and also any other vehicles in the game, tank destroyers, light tanks of course. It is just a utterly ridiculous tank, and if you even decide to load the HE rounds with this thing, you've got 1200 alpha damage. So not only can you pen light tanks and lightly armoured mediums for 950, but actually 1200 if you've got the right round loaded, and players that know what they're doing will do this all of the time. So yeah, I'm not a fan of this vehicle whatsoever, and I'm sure you guys, if you've been playing at tier 10 or tier 8s, you know all about this tank. And I mean, a tier 8 is not going to be able to do anything compared to this vehicle. So yeah, 3-shotting pretty much every tank in the game, even if they're a tier 10 heavy. That sounds balanced to me. Yeah, not a fun one to come up against, but there we go. That's the Turan, and of course it can only go in the same direction here as we look at the next vehicle, and that next vehicle being another console exclusive. It's always good to see the console exclusive tanks being very well balanced, and this is the Centurion AVRE. This is the latest addition at the recording of this video that is absolutely disgusting in the game, or at least for the majority of players, because of the fact that it is, as you can see, a Centurion that has a big derp gun, and that big derp gun does 1400 damage if you can penetrate with it. It has 185 pen, so it's able to pen quite a few things. I mean, not everything, but remember it's a HE round, so even if you don't pen with this thing, well, a HESH round, it's able to deal at least 400 to 500 damage to any opponent it hits. And it's not like you have to aim either to do that, so it can splash Mauses for 400, 500, even hundreds for 400 or 500, and essentially you can bounce quite a few rounds in this thing, because why wouldn't they give a Centurion with a derp gun a huge, super thick frontal plate that is essentially like the Ram Panzer or the Tier 8 American, well, I think it's a German actually, but it's essentially just a M48 pattern with a huge ramming plow thing. And yeah, it's the same thing on this vehicle. So yeah, and it counts as spaced armor, so not only do you have to go through that, but you also have to go through the armor behind it, which is not particularly the easiest to go through anyway. And so yeah, you've got to go through one spaced armor plate, then the next, and then the actual armor of the tank behind, which is pretty bad, but yeah, I mean, it gets penned quite easily if you can hit in between the plow and the upper plate, or onto the upper plate, but actually being able to do that, you get a very slim shot if you're on the same plane as it, so not particularly the easiest thing. And then of course the lower plate has these huge steel bars in the plane of where you'll be shooting, so they get even more spaced armor as you effectively have to go through the plate and continue going through the plate to hit the armor behind it, making it even more of a pain to pen. So you have to hit in between all of these, or have just stupid penetration to go through that lower plate. So yay, very fun to come up against. But it does of course get the Centurion turret, which recently got buffed on console, which means that it now is actually pretty good and enables you to bounce quite a few off the turret, even though it is quite flat, because it is, what, 254mm thick and has a slight angle, but yeah, you can pen it with premium rounds, but of course trying to hit that reliably without hitting the angled parts of the turret is kind of difficult, and so your cupola is the best bet for this tank if it does manage to get hulled down and you can't see that upper plate. But yeah, not particularly a very well balanced tank in my opinion, and don't worry, because thinking that it's a very slow tank would be the wrong assumption, because although it has all of this spaced armor that's additional to the vehicle and has a huge gun, it is actually able to do 48 kilometers an hour, which means that it still keeps up with a lot of the tier 10 mediums in the game. And of course it has a ridiculous turret traverse and hull traverse, so that anyone trying to get around this thing to actually take out the into the weakly armor portions of the armor, yeah, I mean, it's very difficult, because it's going to be able to turn and keep up with you, and of course hit you for 1400, especially since when you're trying to traverse the vehicle you're often side on, and yeah, I mean, it's not very fun getting hit for 1400. So it is not necessarily an super overpowered tank, but it is definitely really annoying and very good, and it means that it is very easy to play, because essentially anyone that plays in this vehicle is able to hit you for whatever, and if you haven't got over 400 or 500 alpha damage, it's going to outtrade you regardless of if it pens you or not, making this one of the kind of noob friendly vehicles, and super annoying if you're doing everything right. Angling against it, there's literally no point, since it will just hit you with the HESH rounds and deal way more damage than you'll be able to deal back unless you're in an E100. And then of course if this thing is side scraping towards you and then you're side scraping against it, you're probably not going to pen it, because you most likely don't have HESH rounds that are going to be able to splash it for 500. So you have to pen, and if you don't, it's going to reload, it's going to hit you again for 500, and then you've lost 1000 health from someone that has literally not done anything really that right. So yeah, I mean, this tank is just a super annoying and kind of flank blocker when it comes to World of Tanks console, and yeah, hopefully this thing gets nerfed, since it was part of the Ultimate Season Pass and Wargaming are looking at it, but I'm not entirely convinced that they'll do anything about it. And yeah, and that is the AVRE. And then this video takes a dip down to tier 8 to another console exclusive vehicle, the NM116 Panzerjäger, which is once again, like the Turan, a Cold War vehicle that they've shifted across to World War II mode and literally changed none of the stats. And that means that this tier 8 has penetration values similar to that of tier 10 tank destroyers and has 262 base penetration, meaning that any vehicle you come up against at tier 8 is pretty much an auto pen through the thickest armor that you can possibly find on the vehicle, and failing that you can always load the heat rounds, which have 320 penetration, meaning that anything you see is an auto pen basically at tier 8. And at tier 10s, obviously, because you have the penetration, it's not a problem, and there's a reason why you'll probably want to be in tier 10 games in this thing compared to tier 8, and that's because there's more hit points for you to farm on a tier 10 game, and because you have ridiculous damage per minute in this thing, 3000 with a advanced loader. And if we actually put in a commander into this vehicle, since we don't have one in there, it makes the damage per minute go sky high. So let's just find a crew that makes it better. This isn't a kind of a camo crew, so you won't be seeing the camo bonuses, but 3,500 damage per minute at tier 8. That means that it's better than all tier 8 medium tanks in the game, it's better than all tier 8 tank destroyers in the game pretty much, and it has unbelievable accuracy, 0.28 accuracy with this thing. It's able to go 61 kilometers an hour, so it's fast. It has unbelievable camo and concealment as well as view range, and it also has a ridiculous rate of fire. And that ridiculous rate of fire, what is it? It's 4.89 seconds, which means that any skilled player knowing how to pen and track vehicles is going to be able to do that super consistently, making this one of the highest skill cap tier 8 vehicles, and how I've been able to deal over 4,000 average damage in this thing when I've played it in tier 8 games. Yeah, I mean, this is basically a tier 9 or tier 10 vehicle at tier 8. It just has the same hit points as a tier 8, and that's pretty much the only thing it does have. And when you compare it to tier 10 mediums, it almost has the same DPM as them too, because, yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you want a tank 2 tiers lower that has the same DPM as tier 10 mediums? Wargaming, what are you doing with these console exclusive ones? I have no idea, but there you go, that is another broken vehicle. And of course this one you can actually just outright buy, and the only way you can actually pick it up is by buying it. So yeah, it's also significantly cheaper than some of the tier 10 premiums. Yeah, I would definitely purchase this one if I had to spend some money on the game and I wanted an outrageously good premium, and it's also a very good one to learn vehicles and to learn how to play World of Tanks as well. And then the final one of my favourite console exclusive vehicles, is actually the Dreadnought KV2. Yeah, this is a KV2 that has a tier 7 gun, which is the SU-152's gun, which means that it doesn't have to rely upon the derp to be able to pen things, because it has 250 heat pen, which is essentially just a better round. There is no reason why you would fire standard in this thing, unless of course you're going to aim at tracks, but the key thing is that it's just better if you load heat, and it also has the capability of penning things for 910 with its 86mm of HE pen that it gets on its HE. So yeah, this thing is another vehicle that I've always enjoyed. It's also faster than the KV2. It also gets somewhat more mobile traverse speed, which allows it to turn slightly quicker than the KV2. And yeah, I mean, this thing is just a bit of a boy when it comes to tier 7, and is able to deal 700 damage pretty quickly, and doesn't have the worst damage per minute for a tank like this. And considering that we get all of the perks and skills that you can on console, whereby you can increase the accuracy dramatically, that allows you to increase or decrease the accuracy down to 0.44 accuracy, which is very good for a derp cannon that's able to do 700, and makes it one of my favourites. Is it overpowered? Probably not overpowered, but it is very strong, and one of the ones that I always felt like changed the game when they brought this one in. And of course it's a bit of a fan service as well. So those are some of my favourite tanks in the game and some of the most overpowered vehicles. Maybe not my favourites actually, that's probably a bad use. I don't really use some of the broken ones like the Tyrant, since they're not very fun to play because, you know, it's down to the tank when you have a good game pretty much, as opposed to the player behind it. But yeah, a real good list of some of the tanks that people should probably be aware of when they play the game, and maybe we'll even make a part 2 to this after I see some of the comments that you add in, hopefully about some of the vehicles that you also think are very powerful within World of Tanks console. Hopefully you did enjoy this video, and if you did, please do think about subscribing and helping the channel as we're trying to get to 15,000 subs, and we are so close now. It will be a massive goal. Thank you guys, and I hope you enjoy the video. Goodbye.